My guest today is Barbara Chabbaga. Barbara is a lead consultant for AB Consultants, an insurance consultancy in Nairobi, Kenya. Barbara grew up in Kenya before training as an actuary in Canada and then returning to her country of her birth to specialize in microinsurance, a field she works in today. Barbara, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me on to have this chat with you. I'm really excited for the next 1 hour.
So I'd like to actually start with you leaving Kenya. Now, you left to go to Canada. I'm wondering if you could just tell the story about how that came about, why you chose Canada, and why you chose to be an actuary.
Okay. So I first left Kenya when I finished my high school education, my lower high school education in 2000. And I actually went to the UK to do my A-levels.
Okay.
So
how old were you at that time?
I was about 16.
Okay.
16 going on 17. So I did my A-levels in the UK for 2 years. And then usually after that, the next progression would be to do your degree, your university degree.
Right.
And the plan was I wanted to be a dentist. Well, I thought I wanted to be a dentist. So I did all my interviews in the UK for university, and I was supposed to go in the summer of 2002 to go and to study dentistry either at one of the universities. I got into University of Leeds and Manchester.
Were you always going to stay? Were you going to come back to Kenya the whole time, or was this like a temporary thing, or were you going to stay in the UK at the time?
No, I was going to come back home.
Always. That was
always my plan.
And so you were just there for the education, because I guess then the education in Kenya is not as strong, not as good for something like dentistry, or.
Yeah, so of course, it's a privilege to be able to to leave
Sure.
your country. I think to experience a different country and learn a different culture and get a different education. So it was a privilege. And I'm very grateful to my parents for giving me that opportunity. So I was supposed to go and do dentistry, but then I was very unsure about it. I was going to do it because I thought I like chemistry, I like biology, or I just thought that it's either medicine or dentistry.
Mm.
So I decided to take a year out of school in a gap year and really just think and make a decision about what I wanted to do next, because I still had this feeling inside me that I really did not want to do dentistry. So I took a year out.
What made you change your mind about that? So was there a moment where you thought, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore? Those kind of transitions fascinate me.
Yeah, I just kind of felt like I was doing it for everybody else,
right.
Not for myself.
Yep.
Yeah, I just felt like this. I'm doing this because this is what's expected. This is what I've studied chemistry and biology and math for my A-level, so it's kind of expected that I should go into some medical or biological field.
And of course, those fields are the most highest status fields, let's call them, at least where I grew up in Canada, where that's what your parents, you'd be a doctor, then you're set for life. And why would you ever do anything else? It's so secure, it's so sure. If you've got the grades and you're smart enough, you'd be out of your mind to do anything else. It's so irresponsible to do anything other than, the highest possible profession, right?
That's exactly how it is in Kenya. They say all the smart people in Kenya go to do medicine and engineering. And I don't know if it's true, but I heard that in the US, and most Western countries, they go and study politics. Yeah. And somebody actually made a joke and said maybe that's why Kenya has not gotten to where we're supposed to go, because then in leadership, in politics and in the decision making, you don't necessarily have the smartest people. But
what was I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, but I do love this kind of thing, and I have a personal experience with this myself. What was the conversation like when you told your parents, you know what? I'm not going to do it. Thanks for the investment in sending me here to learn science, but I'm not going to do it.
No, funny enough, they were very supportive. And I didn't tell them I'm not going to do it. I just told them I need a year out. Right. I need to think about it. I need to really, really be sure.
Yep.
And of course, for them, they were going to invest a lot of money in it. So they're probably thinking, you better be really sure that this is what you want to do. So they were completely fine with it. And so I came back home from the UK and I stayed home for a year. During that year, I actually tried to do some form of work shadow in a dentist's office, and I knew for sure that I did not want to study dentistry.
Right.
And so I just started thinking about what other careers are out there, and I kind of wanted to do something unique. I wanted to do something different, and so my dad had a friend who was the CEO of one of the insurance companies here in Kenya. He was the CEO at the time, and I met him one day, and he told me, "Have you heard of this career called actuarial science?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "You should look it up because I think it's a new field." It wasn't being offered at the universities here in Kenya at that time. But he was like, check it out. I think it might be something very interesting for you to study. And so I just started looking it up. I Googled it and, I read about it and apparently they said you'll earn a lot of money and you use your mathematical skills. And I thought this is very interesting. And then I actually did some work experience with that same insurance company. But in underwriting, because of course they didn't have an actuarial department.
Right, they didn't have any actuaries.
No actuaries. So at that time, I think we had 2 qualified actuaries in Kenya.
In the whole country?
And in the whole country, too.
Oh, my God.
that was in...
Wow.
Okay, of course, now I think there must be about 20-something.
Still?
But at that time, there was only 2. Yeah. And
what's the population of Kenya?
So we're actually 45 million.
Okay.
We're doing the census soon, but the estimate is between 45, growing very fast. So, I did this work internship program with them for I think it was about 4 months, and I really enjoyed it. I worked in the underwriting department. I thought it was very interesting, and then I was trying to understand how an actuary would actually come into play in terms of understanding. The probabilities and all that behind it. So I thought, I actually kind of made up my mind at that point that, I'm actually going to study actuarial science.
Cool.
Now, the other thing I did not want to do, I really did not want to go back to the UK because of the weather.
Yep.
It was always grey and dull and rainy. And so you might laugh at how I ended up in Canada.
I know, I was just thinking that.
It's even colder. And so I started thinking about where I would go. So I thought about Australia.
Yep.
I thought about the US. So my options were Australia, the US, or Canada.
Yep.
And then my parents just said, Australia is just too far. It's, we don't know anybody there. We don't know who, it's just too far. So then I narrowed down to the US and Canada. And I just thought, everybody goes to the US. Let me try something different. Let me try Canada. And then I just started looking up the universities that offer actuarial science. The University of Calgary came up, and then some universities in BC. Mm-hmm. And I really didn't do my research very well. I didn't really, I didn't think through the weather. Yeah. So in Kenya, we don't really talk about the weather. We don't talk about the weather. We don't think about it because it's basically constant all year round.
You're on the equator, warm. Right? I mean, it's just always hot.
Yeah, it's not always hot. Like we have rainy season, so we have the long rains and we have the short rains, but it's not a dramatic change in temperature. So we're always ranging between 20 to 30 degrees, for example, in Nairobi all year round. Maybe not even 20, maybe 22 degrees to 30 degrees all year round.
That's great weather.
So, yeah, it's fantastic.
So we
don't talk about the weather. So even when I was thinking about all these schools in Canada, I wasn't really focused on the weather so much. I was like, it's on the West Coast.
How bad
California
can it be?
Is just there. How bad can it be? Yeah. So you can imagine the shock on me when I
mean, Calgary is a whole other planet. I mean, that's a real deep continental climate, real extremes in the summers and winters, lots of snow. I mean, you got everything in Calgary. Exactly. But so I experienced my first snow in November, I think 2013. Yeah. And 2003 when I joined the University of Calgary. But I loved Calgary because despite the weather, despite how cold it was, the sky was always blue. Yep. All year round. So that I loved. That's cool. And so you're in Canada and you're studying actuarial science. How did you? So I mean, you've been. That's your second time as an immigrant in another country. How do you find that? Mm-hmm. Any reflections on that generally? Just maybe set that up a little bit more. I spent a little bit of time you're much more better travel than I at the same age. Where the first time I ever went to an airport was when I was 21 years old, and got on an airplane and went to Hong Kong. And I spent a semester in Asia, in Hong Kong, studying for a university, just a semester, a few months. But it was quite a jarring experience the first time being in a totally different culture where everybody looked different than me. And you kind of get the like, where are you from kind of thing, and they're fine about it for the most part, but you definitely feel out of place in a certain way, and massive transition like that. Reflecting back on that, how did you find that?
That's a very interesting question. I think a lot of time I was very ignorant to the fact that I was different, or the fact that I probably stood out.
Yeah.
It just never occurred. I never dwelt on it. Maybe if I now I think about it more, but at the time, I just wanted to make friends. I wanted to meet new people, and I don't know. Canadians are very friendly.
Yeah.
You're Canadian, right?
I am. Yes.
Yeah. So I until today, I've always found Canadians very friendly, very accommodating. No one ever made me feel like, oh, you're so different.
Yeah.
Funny enough, I never really got any of those questions about whether I live on top of a tree or anything like that. I never did, and I never felt out of place. Funny enough,
did you?
And I lived on campus for the first 2 years, so it was a really nice way to just kind of ease into the society.
Did you feel any kind of subtle differences? So, there are obvious ones. Right, I mean, you'll have a different accent, right? For example, nobody will ever heard there, I imagine. I remember the first time I met somebody who had, one of the African accents. Was this gal in my college class, and she was from, where was she from? I think Ivory Coast or Ghana or something, more west, and it was just like there's just something totally different about. I don't know what it was. There was like a different perspective maybe on things. I think that she was probably come from a very well-to-do family, and maybe that was part of it too. But there's going to be subtle differences that come in from a culture that are not obvious, right? So maybe that way would manifest for you is like, what do you think was the weirdest thing about Canadians from your perspective growing up in Kenya? Come to Canada, you're like, wow, what are you doing this for? Why do people act like this or do this?
So I'll just, I know this is probably not unique to Canadians, probably the people in the US as well. But I remember I used to eat my meals on campus, and I remember it happened twice. So I was ordering something and I wanted to have tomatoes on my sandwich.
Yep.
And so I told the lady who was serving me that I'll have tomatoes.
Yep. There's no idea what
she was like, sorry. She's like, sorry. I said tomatoes. And I knew I was supposed to say tomato, but I had refused. I said, I'm not going to.
Okay.
So I said tomato. Then I said tomato. And so finally I pointed at it and she was like, oh, tomato.
Yeah.
And then something interesting happened. I was in a restaurant and I asked for water.
Yeah.
And, the person serving me was like, sorry, what do you want to drink? I said, water. Eventually, she actually called her supervisor to come and find out what I wanted to drink.
Oh, you're standing your ground.
I did, but eventually I succumbed.
Yeah.
Just to make my life easier. Yeah.
I have a similar story. I lived in the UK for a little while, and I once ordered I think it was a tomato sandwich, and I said tomato to the deli counter, the person on the deli counter, and the guy, I'm not even kidding, laughed in my face. He laughed at me. He's like,
oh, no.
Oh, silly American. He made me a tomato sandwich. I was like, great.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
So you finish up your university career there, I suppose, and you immediately wanted to come back to Kenya, or tell me about that transition after as you get through university in Calgary.
Okay, so when I finished in 2007, I actually worked with the Cooperators, which is an insurance company. They're based in Guelph. That's where the headquarters is. But I was working out of the office in Calgary, and I worked there for about a year and a half. My parents came for my graduation, which was really nice. We went to the Rockies, to Banff, which is beautiful. Then I worked, and then unfortunately in November 2008, my dad passed away, and so I came back home.
Right.
And then I made an emotional decision, or I made a decision not to go back to Canada. So I resigned from my job, and I've been in Kenya ever since.
Wow. And what was your first job back in Kenya? So you turn up, you come back for your father's funeral, and then were you just staying there and thinking, I just can't go back now? Or what was that transition like? What was the moment where you made that decision?
So it was a couple months, so of course I had conflicting advice from everybody. Some people would tell me, you need to focus on your life. You just need to go back to Canada and work because, you need to, your life, you just need to move on with your life. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, I really saw, my mom went through a really tough time, just, I guess, being, I had 3 younger brothers in university. And I just felt like I needed to be there for her. So I had one brother who was in Scotland, another one in the UK, and then the other one was in Kenya. And I just felt like she needed the support and the moral support. And I just made a decision to stay because of my mother.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I remember getting advice actually from one of the 2 qualified actuaries. I think by that time maybe there were 4, but because I had formed a good relationship with them, I remember going to meet one of them and he told me, Barbara, you really, really need to go back. Mm-hmm. You're not going to finish your exams if you stay here. And he was right.
Right. Okay.
He was like, you just need to go back because the structures out there, they work better for you to progress with your career. Yep. But I decided to stay. And then I started looking for a job. And then about 6 months later, I started working again with an insurance company.
Okay. And this is in the Actuarial Department. Were you still intending to continue with the exams, or had you kind of decided that maybe I won't finish this?
So by the time I came back to Kenya, I had 5 exams. I'd done 3 and had 2 exemptions. Okay. With the Society of Actuaries. And I really did want to do them, but it was very inconvenient because at that time there was only one associate actuary with the Society of Actuaries who was based here in Nairobi, and he was the one who used to invigilate the exams, and they were only done once a year. And I was a bit confused at that time. So I first worked with one insurance company on a management trainee program. So it was not an actuarial job. It was a management trainee program, meaning I worked in different departments doing different things. Yep. But I was there for a very short time. And then I was working for a company, it's now called Liberty Life here in Kenya. And then at some point I was headhunted by a company called CIC Insurance Group. Now, it's actually a it's called Cooperative Insurance Company. And interestingly enough, they have a very strong relationship with the Cooperators of Canada.
Okay, interesting.
Where I worked, yeah.
Did you all know that when you were getting recruited? Did you know that and they know that you had that linked back to their...
So that's actually why they look for me. Somebody mentioned to the CEO that, we know there's a lady who's just come back from Canada and she just... Now, if you go back 10 years before that time, which is now 20 years ago, CIC Insurance, which is an insurance company here in Kenya, went through a really difficult financial time. They were insolvent.
They were, okay.
And because they were insolvent, yes. And because they were part of a bigger... there's an umbrella... a global umbrella body called ICMIF. Okay. Which is it's a federation for cooperatives and mutuals, insurance companies.
Interesting.
And through both CIC was the only cooperative insurer in Africa at the time. That's about 20 years ago. And then so they were part of this body, and it was they're going insolvent. It's the only cooperative insurer in Africa. And I think, companies came together and just said, we're not going to let this company go down. And the company that championed it was actually the Cooperators of Canada.
Okay, interesting.
And they put in money together. I can't remember how much it was. I'm tempted to say $1 million at the time, but my facts could be wrong. So different companies chipped in, including Folksam in Sweden, the Cooperators in Canada, I think Desjardins in Canada. There's about 10 companies. And then they also sent experts to CIC. So the corporators actually sent some of its staff to Kenya, and a few of the other companies. So,
well, do you know what the problem was? Do you know why they wouldn't solve it? What the issue was with the organization?
I'm not really sure, but I just think it was management problems. Probably not putting aside enough reserves. Of course, you don't have actuaries in the countries, and lots of insurance companies. And that's one of the things I'll probably discuss with you later. Part of the reason why the insurance industry in Kenya has struggled is just because of this trust issues, because we've had many insurance companies that have failed.
Yep.
Until the last 10 years, it's stabilized, but before that, it was one company after the other going down.
Is that one of the things? Maybe we can touch on this for a minute now. Is there a theme there for why? Is it simply that they're ignorant of how much capital they need? They don't understand what to do, or is there something? Because generally speaking, Kenya isn't as developed as many other countries, and so there's problems that are specific to Kenya, I would think, and there's problems which are specific to insurance. And I'm wondering, were those more Kenya problems, or were those more kind of insurance just being hard problems, and you don't have the expertise?
I think at the time, so things have really changed from 20 years ago to today. We are probably at the cutting edge of most of the insurance policies globally, but I would say at that time it was probably a lack of expertise. Maybe you're having your reserves done from South Africa by some actuary sitting in South Africa.
Oh, interesting.
You have your pricing and your products developed from a different country. So I think it was probably that, but I think there was also a lot of corporate governance issues as well.
Yeah.
So probably just companies not being run well, people using, probably company resources as personal resources.
Sure. Yeah, theft. Right.
So I think
there's a lot of money in an insurance company. That's if you can get away with it, it'd be a nice thing to transfer over your bank account, I would think.
Exactly, and that happened a lot. Unfortunately, those days it doesn't happen anymore.
Is that right? What's changed?
The regulator. Our regulator is very strong now. They've hired experts. They have fantastic systems. They have actuaries.
I think it's very interesting that the regulator came in and changed that. And one of the things, and this might be an opportunity to introduce the idea of microinsurance, and we can pick up the story again in a moment. But to me, a lot of the opportunity in innovating in insurance emerges in countries where there isn't very much regulation, and as a result, I think that you can do things you can't do elsewhere. Now, that's nice for innovation, but also the lack of regulation has some costs, and among those costs are things like poor corporate governance, insolvencies because of just ignorance, and the regulation reacts, I think, to a public need, which is the public saying we need these companies to be more stable. In come the regulators, and out goes the innovation. And I'm wondering what you think about that kind of thinking on regulation and its relationship to innovation in insurance.
It's very interesting. I'll give you just two insights. A discussion I was actually having yesterday with one of the actuaries working at the regulator. So he told me that it's called IRA, has actually been recognized globally by, I think, A2II for being one of the most innovative regulators. So they have sandboxes where you can experiment. So according to the IRA and according to studies that have been done, they say our regulator is actually ahead of the industry in terms of innovation. So the IRA is actually leading and telling insurance companies you need to be more innovative, and reducing some of the barriers. But when you look at some of the examples that have happened in Kenya, even outside insurance, if we talk about M-Pesa, for example, which is probably the most successful mobile transfer. It is the most successful mobile transfer platform globally. It started because they went ahead of regulation. The regulation did not exist within the Central Bank of Kenya, and the Safaricom, which is the telco, just innovated and went ahead of technology, and regulation caught up with it over time. But if they had not been allowed, then we would not have had that kind of innovation in Kenya. So right now in Kenya, I would say our regulator is actually ahead of innovation. I feel like we have not had the kind of breakthroughs that we should have in the insurance space, but that's why some of us are still working in insurance in the hope that we can have some of those breakthroughs.
Okay, well, we'll come back. We'll definitely come back to that. But let's pick the story up again. And you were hired into this cooperative in Kenya that had been bailed out by a group of international cooperatives, and that's how you got the connection. And so you went to join this company.
So I went to join this company, and so it turned out that the MD of the company had actually studied actuarial science at the university, and then at the same time, that was in 2009, the regulator had actually just become like an independent regulator from 2007-8. So they were now coming in and putting in policies in place. And one of them was that every insurance company must have an actuarial function. Mm-hmm. So at the time, CIC is such an incredible story because they came from being the smallest insurance company in the industry. There were 36 insurance companies at that time. They were like number 36 out of 36 in terms of market share. But because after the bailout and putting, things in place and ensuring the cooperatives and the what we call the savings and credit societies, they actually grew to top 3 in the market. I think They were number 3 in terms of market share. And so a lot of things needed to be put in place. And one of the things they wanted to do was to form an actuarial department. And so when I was hired as an actuarial analyst, my job was to actually form the actuarial department. It was a very daunting thing because I had no idea what to do. Yeah, I didn't know what to do.
So to find people to become actuaries. I guess that's one thing the actuarial department does.
Yeah, even before that, to define what does the actuarial department do? Because most people would actually be like, actually, what is that? Right. Even people working within the insurance company, they would be like, what does that mean? So even just trying to begin, so I worked very closely with our external actuary at the time, a company called Actuarial Services. I worked very closely with them. I learned so much from. I actually used to work 2 days out of their office and probably 3 days out of CIC. So I learned a lot, developed some of the templates that we needed, for reserving, for pricing, so that's what I did for a couple of years. And then I started getting involved. That's when I actually got involved with microinsurance.
When you were working at that company. And how did that come about? When did you first hear about the word microinsurance? For me, it wasn't that long ago.
No, it wasn't. I actually heard about it for the first time when I went to CIC. So I met this lady called Anne. So Anne is actually my business partner at AB Consultants now. Right. But I met Anne in 2009 when I joined CIC. And I was told, this is Anne, and she's heading the microinsurance department. And I thought, wow, what is microinsurance? And then, so that's how I got to know about it. So I got involved a lot with what Anne was doing because she was, entering uncharted waters. So the MD told me and her that you guys, you'll design the product. Barbara will look into pricing them, and that you guys will just drive this. So I got involved a lot because of product design. So we would go a lot. We would go and meet the microfinance institutions together with Anne. We would go and meet the cooperative societies, what we call SACCOs. SACCOs are savings and credit societies, where it could be a farmer's SACCO or it could be a transport SACCO. So really people just come together and put their money together, and those are the societies that actually owned CIC. They were the shareholders of CIC. Okay. Yeah, so that's how I got involved in microinsurance. That was my first introduction to microinsurance.
Do you remember the first product, the first idea that you worked on there?
So the first product that I was involved in, it was not my idea. I found it running. But the first product that I got involved in that was microinsurance was a health product called Bima ya Jamii. Okay. So CIC had formed a partnership with the National Health Insurance Fund. The National Health Insurance Fund is the equivalent for the people in the UK, equivalent to NHS. I can't think of what it would be in the US, but basically the government health hospital fund. So that everybody who is employed pays into this fund, and then you get access to healthcare, to government hospitals. So CIC had formed a partnership with the NHIF at that time to provide additional insurance products to the already existing National Health Insurance Fund.
Okay, a top-up of some sort for extra
like
services.
A top-up.
Right.
Yeah, for extra. No, so actually what we were doing at that time was apart from health, so we're doing personal accident and funeral.
Okay.
So for an extra, so it was a really interesting concept because when I joined CIC, I knew premiums I paid monthly or annually. So suddenly I joined and I was told, this product, Barbara, it goes for 10 cents a day. It's 10 shillings, which I think in the US is about 10 cents a day. And I remember thinking, what? 10 cents a day? And then, somebody gets access to healthcare, there's a funeral cover, and there's a personal accident. So that was the first product I got involved in, and it was very involving because we were working with some development partners out of Sweden who were very interested to understand the learning journey. We were working with the ILO Impact Insurance Facility, which is based in Geneva, and then of course the NHIF, and then ourselves. And just wanted, going through the client journey. So by the time I joined, it was already ongoing, but I got involved with that. That was the first product that I got involved in. And then immediately I joined, we started working on a platform for distributing insurance. So it was actually the first mobile platform in insurance in Kenya. It was called Bima. So Bima in Swahili is insurance, and the M is for mobile. So we developed this platform. We put the first product. We learned a lot because it was not a success, but it was very interesting. But then I worked on various products for the SACCOs, mostly for the MFIs, during my career at CIC.
So what is microinsurance?
So microinsurance is insurance for low-income households. It has the same principles as any insurance, you'd think about. You're getting a risk covered in exchange for premium, but it's only that it is specifically designed for low-income households, and the modes of payment are slightly different. The risks that are covered could be bundled, for example, but it's really just insurance made accessible to low-income households.
What's the word? Sorry to interrupt you. I'm just wondering what the word for microinsurance is in Swahili.
No, we don't have a word for microinsurance. We just have a word for insurance,
right?
Which is Bima.
Bima. And just out of curiosity, if you don't mind geeking out on me with me on this for a second, where does that Bima is that an adaptation from another word somewhere else? Because it's not insurance, right? Just spoken with a Swahili accent. This is its own word. Where did that come from? Do you know the word Bima? Is it related to some other word?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, David. I actually don't know. But interestingly enough, it's a word that is also used in India.
Interesting.
I know they're actually, I don't know that but I know there are insurance companies and innovations that have come out of India, and they're called Bima. So I'll have to get back to you on that, David. So maybe, I really don't know.
Is there a strong Indian influence in the Kenyan? I guess there might be for the British Commonwealth.
There is.
It's interesting. I didn't know that. Is there a lot of it?
Yeah, there's a very strong Indian influence in Kenya. The Indian community has been very successful in business in Kenya. Yeah. So even our food is very, apart from, we don't do a lot of spices, but our food, we have chapati, which is actually from India. We do a lot of stews and curries, but not spicy, which is also from India. Yeah.
Interesting.
And it happened during the colonial days. A lot of Indians came to Kenya.
Of course.
Yes.
So let's pick the story up again. So you're working in microinsurance, and it seems like you're working on lots of different kinds of projects. Were you feeling like it was working? Like this was a successful career turn for you? Were you satisfied with it?
Yeah, I was quite satisfied. I actually, so we actually built out the department. We were mostly only doing work in life. So microinsurance was actually sitting within the life company at the time. It was very interesting. I got to, to interact. I was very lucky because so Folksam is an insurance company in Sweden, part of the ICMIF as well. They invited me to Sweden for 3 weeks in I think it was in 2012 or 2011, and they, basically just, I was attached to the Actuarial Department. I got a lot of support. And then I also was able to hire people from the university to come in and, on internship programs. And from there, the people started appreciating a bit more what we were doing because we became very innovative. We were able to design products a lot faster. So most of my work was actually product design rather than the more technical, reserving and stuff like that. We used to do that, but most of my work was actually in innovating and in product design, and that's what I enjoyed the most.
How do you design a product, an insurance product? What's the first idea, and how do you work on that? What sort of things do you look into in building a new product?
So, do you want to know how I do it now, or how I used to do it then?
Maybe contrast them. Maybe talk about how you did it then and why you thought that might be right or wrong, and what you've learned.
Yeah. So how we do it now at AB Consultants, we call it a bottom-up approach. So we would never ever sit in a boardroom and be like, hey, we think this is a really good idea and this is the kind of product we should design. So we always design the products with the market. When I look back at my previous life working in the corporate world, it was very tempting, to sit in a marketing meeting or a product design meeting and say, I really, really think that if we did this kind of product, it would work. And we've done that many times. And I'm a culprit. I don't deny it.
Right.
So what we do now is that we actually, for example, if we thought there's an opportunity for a product, or most times, you'll end up running into something. We'd actually public commission a study. So if it's for farmers, we probably go and sit with farmers, do focus group discussions with them, and not bring them to our offices. No, go to the field,
wow.
Go to the tea estates, or go to the informal settlements here in Nairobi. And to be very honest, David, I actually did that for the first time after I left CIC. So before that, the marketing team would tell me, so Barbara, we have this idea for a product. And I'll tell them, okay, so what product they would, design what they think the product should be, and we would price it and, go back and forth, and that would be the product. We'd package it, launch it.
Right.
But now, I would never do that now, but it's only time that would teach you that.
You know what, I think that's so brilliant, because it's one of these truths about the world that you need to, in order to understand the world, you have to go out into the world. And I heard a saying recently, which I love, which is 1 day in the field is worth 10 days in the office. And maybe it should be 100 days in the office, right? Because
I love that.
So much more you get by being out. Get in another Silicon Valley kind of saying is to say, get the bleep out of the building and go talk to your customers, because there's so much more knowledge in their heads than you could possibly have just sitting there working it out on your own. That's wonderful. Exactly.
And I like that, get the bleep out of the building and, go and talk to your customers, because when I think about the field I have chosen to be in, which is microinsurance, or you'd call it inclusive insurance, the clients would be probably completely different from the top end corporate guys working in the insurance company. So it's actually, it can even be scary for somebody working in the insurance industry to be told, you're wearing your suit and your heels, or your,
very intimidating. You're
your polished shoes.
Very important.
Yeah, exactly. So you really cannot, you really cannot go out to and talk to somebody who is selling tomatoes on the side of the road. They'll be terrified of you.
Yeah.
So and at the same time, the insurance companies, probably when you're working for these big corporates, you're probably just as scared to go out. So I really like what I'm doing now, because we do that all the time. We're always in the field, and from an actuarial perspective, it has really given a face to to the work that I'm doing.
Oh, that's
I'm no longer just looking at numbers and designing products. It's actually, I see the people that I'm designing the products for.
So phenomenal. That's so phenomenal. And one of the things that is so challenging for people in the insurance business is it's an intangible product, so it's hard to derive that kind of meaning from it, and being able to get experience out in the field would be so powerful. I want to actually interject with a quick story about your point there of the way people look in the field. So when I started working in the insurance business, I started wearing a suit to work every day. And one day I was living and working in Toronto, and my grandmother was in the city. My grandparents were in the city, and I went to lunch with them, and I walked up, and I was wearing a suit. I don't even remember that I'm wearing a suit anymore. You just do it every day.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother was just so struck. She's like, "Oh my gosh!" She's like, "I feel like I should salute you." That's what she said to me. And I was like, "Oh, wow."
Who, your grandmother said that?
Yeah, she did to me. And it was kind of half joking, but she's just sort of used to seeing me as a kid growing up and all that, just wearing whatever civilian clothes, and suddenly I'm wearing this business uniform effectively, and it, it changes the way people look at you, and I think it's easy to forget that when you're trying to meet people.
I like, and just following on what you've said, David, there's a very successful bank here in Kenya that changed how we do banking. And about 15 years ago, the banking was for the few privileged people. To have a bank account, you must have been a very important person in Kenya.
Right.
To own a bank account. If you're a woman, for example, your husband must have allowed you to open it, or if you must have gotten a reference from somebody else for the bank to agree.
Wow.
You must have brought your pay slip. And then Equity Bank decided, no, all we need is your ID, and don't even bring a picture. We'll take a picture of you. Don't worry. And they started doing that on the streets. So they would open up desks and just take pictures. And then a long time ago they would say you need a minimum balance of $200. And gosh, who has $200 to put in an account to just sit there? And they said no minimum balance. Just come as you are. When you have money, you can bring it. If you have $1, you can just bring it when you're ready. And then what they also did is that they later realized, as they opened up branches, that in the countryside, people were getting intimidated to enter their branches because you think there's a sparkling marble.
Sure.
So what they started doing, they started pouring sawdust in their banking halls, so that a farmer would feel very comfortable to walk in with their gumboots and not leave marks
that's amazing.
all over the place. Yeah. So they started, people just started feeling more comfortable to enter these this amazing
what was that bank called?
Banking hall. Equity Bank.
Equity Bank. And was it a startup there? How did that begin? How much do you know about it? Who started it? You know anything about like that?
It started as a housing finance corporation of sorts, and it was very small. It was nothing. Then the person who's the current CEO was right now probably one of the wealthiest people in Kenya.
I bet.
He was working in a bank somewhere, and he decided to tell these guys, can you give me a chance? And then he managed to convince a few people, and then he just revolutionized everything. Wow. You can imagine we came from a time when probably less than 300,000 people had an account, and within 10 years, he had about 7 million people banking with him.
My gosh.
So it completely changed how people viewed banking, and
That's so cool. So let's talk a little bit about the next transition when you leave to start AB Consultants. What prompted that?
So what happened? So a couple of things happened, David. I got married, and I had a daughter, and one of the things that I felt like I wanted to spend more time with her. But more than that, I had also gotten to a point in my career where I really wanted to do more, but I think also in a corporate setting, there's only so much that you can do. There's boundaries. And I just felt like, I think, and I just kept thinking, I'm like, I think, because I'd gotten a lot of training by that time. I had gotten opportunities to travel to so many countries, to learn so much. I'd gotten so much training, and I just felt like maybe the industry as a whole would benefit from the knowledge and the expertise that I have currently. Because if you look at the insurance industry in Kenya, and even today, we have 53 insurance companies only serving 5% of the market. So it's tiny. Wow. It's microscopic
You need an equity bank moment of some sort.
You need that's actually what I'm looking for. That equity bank, that Safaricom M-Pesa moment. And so what happened? What's been happening is that all the companies are fighting over a very small portion of the top 5% of Kenyans. Yet you have this 95% of Kenyans who, from the middle class to the low income, who are facing the same kind of risks, are using M-Pesa every day, are banking are borrowing money using their mobiles, using the really funky credit scoring apps on their phones. They're doing really interesting stuff, but they don't have access to insurance. So in 2013, two things happened. So my daughter was born, and then a couple of weeks after she was born, I was actually caught up in an attack that I almost lost my life.
Whoa!
In September 2013, yeah, I had gone to. My daughter was only 7 weeks at the time, so I never used to really leave her. But for the first time, I actually left her at home, and I had somebody helping me, and I told her I'll be back within 2 hours. So just told her, left her all the instructions. There's milk here, and there's this. Just change her diaper. And I told her I'll be back within 2 hours. I just needed to do a run, and I needed to just get some air for myself.
Yeah.
So I left the house and I went to Westgate. Westgate is one of the malls in Nairobi, very nice mall. And when I was at Westgate, there was a terrorist attack. It was the first time there's ever been a terrorist attack in a mall in Kenya. And so it was, I don't know if they've ever heard about it, but it was quite a big deal. It was all over the news. So the Kenyan army forces were in Somalia fighting some of the terrorists there. And because of that, it was payback. They were like, if you don't leave our country, then we're going to attack you. So a lot of people lost their lives there. I was actually stuck there for about 7 or 8 hours.
Wow.
Hiding. You just hear hiding. Yeah, I was hiding with about 32 other people.
Where were you hiding? So it was a shooting attack, right?
Shooting, grenades, everything. Yeah, but they came with, they had magazines, across them. There were about 6 terrorists, and they were just shooting anybody in their sight. It didn't matter whether you're a child. They shot. There was a children's convention, a cooking class for children, and they shot the children. It was it was horrible. And so I was stuck in this little filing room. I ran around. I was trying to figure out where to hide. I wasn't sure it's a robbery, and I ended up hiding in a little filing room, which I was very lucky because it was very hidden, and we were about 32 people in that tiny room. And we hid there for about 8 hours until we were rescued.
How long did the shooting last? Did you hear gunshots? Did that last for a while?
Oh, it went on, and you'd hear the grenade. So when that grenade is rolling on the floor, and then it would explode.
Wow. I don't know what that sounds like.
Yeah, I was traumatized because when you roll a pen on top of a table,
right,
it makes a similar sound. And I never knew that until after that ordeal. And a pen rolling on the floor would terrify, on a table would terrify me. So when I sat there, you're sitting in this dark room, and I was thinking about my life. I'm like, okay, so I might die today. I'll probably die today because you'd hear the grenades all over from the top. You could hear the terrorists shouting. You'd hear people screaming, and of course, that person has been killed at that point. And we knew that for sure they were going to find us. That's what we thought. They'll find us. And I prayed and I did everything I asked. And I just told God, please just spare my life this one time. And if you do, I'm going to actually live my life to the fullest. And finally, luckily enough, when we were actually saved and we got out, I made a couple decisions. And one of them was that I was actually going to leave my job at CIC. At that time, I was assistant manager for the actuarial services and microinsurance. So at that point, I made the decision that I was going to leave.
Tell me about when you came home and saw your daughter.
Oh my gosh. It was the most emotional thing. So when I left, so my husband, we were being taken to a place, a center, and then my husband came to pick me from there. And then we went home, and I think I was completely numb. I was in shock. It is the most. I was actually the last group of people to be saved. And after that, the place was. They did a lot of horrible things in there. And then I got home. My daughter was asleep because I got home around 8 p.m. And I got to the mall at 11 a.m. So you can imagine by the time we were rescued, it was about 7 p.m. And, I just broke down and I cried. I could not, I actually had told myself, okay, so this is the last day of your life,
Yeah.
And I remember chatting to my husband on my phone before that, then my phone died. And it was very emotional, very, very emotional. And I remember one of the things my brother used to always tell me, he's like, Barbara, you need to be more impulsive in your life. Because maybe I used to be very structured. I would take a very long time to make decisions. Should I do this? I'm like, no, maybe I should, So those are some of the little things that I said I really wanted to change in my life. I wanted to be happier. I wanted to do things more, to be more impulsive, to do things that scare me. And one of them was that I never thought I could quit my job and leave. And I did. And that's when I decided, yeah.
But you also convinced your partner to come along with you, who's the A in AB Consulting, I would think.
So at that time, Anne had actually left CIC as well. She had left, I think about a year and a half before I did, and that's why I was also handling the microinsurance departments, because when she left, the MD was like, so Barbara, you'll have to take, you can do both. You now have people in the actuarial department who can do the more technical stuff, and maybe you can actually be more focused on microinsurance. So I was actually running the two departments at the time. And then Anne had left, and she was working for a company called FSD, Kenya, Financial Sector Deepening. It's a program that's funded by the UK government for financial inclusion. So they do innovations, and they wanted to get into microinsurance. So Anne did a countrywide study on microinsurance, but she had a 1-year contract. So around the time when I was leaving CIC, she had also ended her contract with FSD. She had done the study, she had given them the report, and then she had begun doing some consultancy work in microinsurance. So at the time she was like, oh my gosh, you've left your job. And I said, yeah, I left. She's like, so what are your plans? I told her, I really don't know yet, but I think, why don't we do something together? And so her side of the story is very interesting. It's very profound. She had been looking for a job, and at some point she actually told me that she told God, you know what, I'm not going to apply for any more jobs. The person that you want me to work with will call me. And she said 2 days later,
wow.
2 days later, I called her and I'm like, Anne, can we meet? And she's like, yeah. And when we met, I told her, so I have this idea. I think we can actually work for the industry. We could do consulting. And, I thought I had put together all these things that I thought about. And before I'd even continue, she just said, yes, when do we start? And I was like, but I thought, she's like, no, I don't need any convincing. Because I was really ready with my business case and,
Yeah.
So I was, to tell her, these are the companies we can approach. So when she just said yes, I was like, okay. So then we just started. We were lucky we had somebody who allowed us to use 2 desks in their office. So we worked out of somebody's office for, the beginning. We just put together, what can we do? So I had the actuarial background. She had microinsurance. We had done quite a bit of work in training. We had trained a lot of circles, so we could do training.
What was your first client? What was the first paying job you got as AB consultants?
So the first we actually, funny enough, got 2 paying jobs basically in a span of 2 weeks. This was in July 2014. So we met up in March. We started putting our presentations and then together. And then in July, we got approached by a USAID program that was focused on healthcare. It's called SHOPS, Strengthening Health Outcomes Through the Private Sector. So they wanted a technical assistance for 2 clients. One of them was a chain of clinics, and the other was a hospital. And for both, what they wanted was to develop a health financing or microinsurance program that we would then, that was supposed to be the outcome of the study. So it was so these two, the chain of clinics and the hospital, those were two different projects. So Anne headed one and I headed the other one. And this is where we started working in the informal settlement. So the first two paying jobs were research based. So we partnered with a research company, but we actually did a lot of the work. I sat in focus group discussions with women, talking about maternal healthcare. How do you finance your healthcare needs? We carried out quantitative research, so I supervised some of it. So it was very, very involving, but that was the first job we did, and then the rest is history.
So I'm wondering what the startup climate is like in Kenya. Is entrepreneurial activity? I mean, obviously in the informal sector of the economy where people are selling fruit or whatever have you, farm goods, and gosh, who knows what else. In smaller villages, entrepreneurialism is the way of the majority of the way of life, I guess. But
yes, it is.
I mean, so like my preconceived notion goes, and I'm wondering, in what way and how and whether you think this is wrong. In more white collar work, there tends to be a lot higher barriers to entry, be it difficult to get a permit to start a company and these kinds of things. That tend to be the sort of barriers that exist in lesser developed countries. Do you think that is that the case there? What's it like to start a company in Kenya?
Now, interestingly enough, in the last, I would say 5 years or probably a bit more, the government has become very, I would say, innovative when it comes to such things. So registering a company these days takes minutes. You can register a company within minutes.
Wow.
You can do it online. You don't have to go anywhere. Of course, when we did it, we had to get a lawyer, and the lawyer did it for us. But from what I hear, right now things have changed. So the barriers to registering a company are hardly there. It doesn't really cost too much. So for us, it was that. It was really not much. There's not many licenses and things like that to register a company. What I would say for me, especially in consulting, what the biggest challenge, and we still face it until today, is that there's always this preconceived notion that it is better to get a consultant from the Western world. Mm-hmm. So I'd rather get a consultant from the US. I would rather have David come and tell me about microinsurance than Barbara, who is there. So that's actually some of the challenges that I would say we face. That is more it's more about the business rather than about policies and things like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's talk a bit more about microinsurance. I mean, we're kind of running a little bit low on time. Hopefully you have a few more minutes, and I'd like to talk about kind of what the microinsurance climate is like there. What sort of things you're working on? What are the projects? What do I not know about microinsurance? There's a lot of things I don't know about microinsurance. What are some useful things for me to understand?
Wow. So one of the interesting things that I would say about microinsurance, or rather my role at AB and working in microinsurance, is that basically I realized, I can't say that I'm only doing actuarial work. Mm-hmm. I do almost everything. From the times when we got to meet clients, from doing research, to going to pitch that, hey, I can do this, and then going to do the research and then designing the products, and going all the way to if it's to train insurance companies. So some of the interesting work I would say that we've done at AB is so currently we have a training program that we've just started running, and we're trying to get into the area of data science and trying to see whether data can unlock some of the challenges we currently have in microinsurance, or rather let me not even call it microinsurance, in insurance. Yeah. We're actually moving more towards calling it inclusive insurance, which is really just saying that, hey, it's not just this low-income households who don't have access to insurance, but it's actually the middle-income market who also don't have insurance, yet they have an income. And so those are some of the I would say that's probably how I would define
instead of microinsurance.
Instead of microinsurance. So we're moving towards calling it inclusive insurance, although still a lot of people are still calling it microinsurance. So some of the projects we're doing and have done, for example, I've said we're doing trainings, trying to build capacity in the industry. So we train insurance players, the banks, and we've actually partnered with a data scientist in the US. He's originally from Uganda, but we put together a curriculum with him. And then we've also done some projects in the tea estate. So trying to develop some insurance products for the tea market in Kenya. Although it's been very difficult because it's the weather patterns have not allowed us yet. We've done some projects in health. So trying to develop health financing mechanisms. The most interesting project that I'm hoping we'll get into, and then also before I get into that, we've developed strategies for insurance companies, MFIs, in Kenya, but even in Ethiopia and in Zambia. I do training as well in specifically in pricing, how to price microinsurance products, which I got to learn is very, very interesting because you're not just pricing in a vacuum, but you're looking at the entire process from collecting data to piloting. Some of the interesting projects that we are trying to get into now that possibly you'd be like, is that microinsurance? Is something for human wildlife conflicts. So you have maybe about 500 people who lose their lives. Lots of property is lost when you have human wildlife conflicts with elephants and other wildlife as well.
Right.
It's a very new concept to us.
What does that mean? Is that the elephants kind of driven into their territory and smash stuff?
Yeah, so an elephant could come and find, let's say, a farmer and either trample on their crop, or a lion could come and eat their livestock. And what happens? It creates human wildlife conflict where the farmer then wants to kill the elephant or the lion. So it's very, very initial stages, but we're trying to think about, is there a way we could develop an insurance scheme that would then actually compensate the farmer or the individual or the family of the individual who has lost their lives because of this, so that somebody doesn't feel like I need to revenge on this elephant and I need to kill it, but if there's some form of compensation, maybe to actually reduce human wildlife conflict. We are carrying out some research currently for healthcare as well, still in the informal sector. And just many small projects. We're doing some projects in data, so trying to understand how data can actually unlock the potential of microinsurance.
Yeah, how do you get the data? Where's the data collected? It's a pretty sophisticated thing for an economy to produce, which is accurate and consistent data, and that's not easy.
Yeah, so we don't really have, the way in the US you probably can buy data from a data warehouse. We don't have that. So how we've done it so far is that we partner with an insurance company, and we would actually work with the data that they have. And that's what our data scientists would be working with. And
that tends to be pretty good, because one of the ways I like to think about data is that it's garbage until somebody starts using it. And so thinking about the state of the actuarial profession in Kenya, where there aren't really very many actuaries, the primary users of a lot of the data, it must have been pretty terrible for a long time, the data available even to insurance companies.
Exactly. And you might laugh, but for the longest time, probably until a few years ago, we were using, even for mortality, we were using tables from the UK, 1958 tables from the UK.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, because we just didn't have our own tables. And maybe one other thing that I haven't talked about that I've been spending a lot of my time doing as well is that we've been developing a technology platform to enable us to distribute very, very simple and low-ticket insurance products. I'm avoiding using the word microinsurance products because we're looking at non-microinsurance products as well. So the platform is called Cover App. It's currently available on the Play Store. And we've onboarded, we designed a very low ticket domestic, like the home insurance, because when we've been doing research and talking to people, and we want to find out what kind of risks do you face. So number one is always health. Sorry.
Yep.
And number two, funny enough, what people told us, apart from agriculture and the farmers, but in the urban setting, people actually told us, it's just the things around me, my phone and my home. If it could be theft or breakage. And every time that happens, and mostly it's phones and electronics,
yeah.
You go into your savings. And out of everybody we surveyed, no one even imagined that you could get these things covered through insurance. Now, on top, what's interesting is that when we also asked people, what are these things, what's the value of the things that you value most? What figure would you put to it? And 87% of the people told us that they would value all the things that the things that they value around them, their electronics, their furniture, their appliances, at less than $1,000. Now, if you compare this to what the insurance companies are offering, you're looking at cover limits of a minimum of $5,000, $10,000. So it's very intimidating.
Yep.
And somebody just imagines this is completely out of reach for me. And then you're also looking at paying upfront annual premiums. So the product we designed, and this is something that we've been working on over the last year and a half, and then now we've actually designed other products as well. But the first product was a home cover, starting from a cover of $500 for $1 a month. You pay us monthly through your phone, and these are some of the innovations that we're working on.
It's interesting you mentioned the Play Store. That just kind of stuck in my head because obviously the mobile smartphone penetration in Kenya, I was just looking it up as you were speaking there, it looks to be 60, 70% or so, which is pretty high. And they must be entirely Android phones just because that they're more affordable than an iPhone, which is over here the equivalent would be to put it in the Apple Store. That's an interesting difference.
So actually 97% of Kenya is Android, 3% is Apple.
Yep.
So we would not even bother designing something for the App Store. But David, can I give you an interesting fact?
Yeah.
That Kenya's internet speed is faster than the US.
Amazing. Amazing. I'm not surprised, honestly. I'm not.
So it's because of people are accessing their, everything is done on the phone.
Yeah.
We're very big on doing everything on the phone. And that's why we think, that's why we're thinking a bit ahead and thinking maybe an app for insurance could be interesting. Maybe it might not be interesting now, but maybe in the next few years it could.
Well, as I think you mentioned before, kind of you're right at the cutting edge of insurance globally with that very thought, because I think that's how people are, what kind of things folks are working on here in the InsurTech community. And so I think we're running out of time, so maybe we can close a little bit on what you think might be interesting things that might transfer from your knowledge of microinsurance and I've already forgotten the word, accessible insurance. What you said?
Inclusive insurance.
Inclusive insurance. Sorry. What can we? How transferable is that to, like the United States, let's say, or the UK or Canada, or these these countries that have been at the development frontier for a long time? What can we learn from microinsurance? Can it be transferred? Inclusive insurance. Wow,
that's a very interesting question. I don't know whether it can be transferred the way it is, but I think with the kind of challenges and the kind of I'll give you an example. I interacted recently with some insurers from Mongolia through a global iLab that I'm in. And because Kenya has advanced so much in weather index for agriculture, so we use weather index to develop, that's how we have the products for livestock and crop. And the Mongolians were like, this is something that would be transferred to them because they have, cattle is actually the backbone of their economy. So I found that interesting. I thought, okay, so we could actually transfer weather index to Mongolia. I'm wondering whether that is something that could be transferable to the US, for example. I don't know, probably subsidies and all that really cushion the farmers. But I'm wondering, with the way weather is changing, whether something like weather index, which is used for microinsurance here, could be useful in the West. And then I also think around innovations of mobile, because we've been forced to think about solutions around the mobile phone. So we're looking at nano lending. So if I woke up today, David, and I said I needed a small loan of $200, I can get that within seconds on my phone because of we're not a credit card market.
Wow.
But I could get that through my phone, through some really interesting credit scoring algorithms. Through an app, for example, and I'm actually, one of the things I'm thinking about is that you can probably inbuild microinsurance into some of these nano lenders, and I'm wondering whether that's something that, again, is transferable to the US or to the UK, to Canada.
I was going to say, I think you're probably right. I think that if mobile insurance delivery is ever going to get solved, it will get solved first in a country that is totally focused on mobile. I mean, everybody's focused on mobile phones, but I think even to a greater degree in a place like Kenya.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm about to end it there. My guest today has been Barbara Chabbaga. Barbara, thank you very much for being part of the show.
Okay, thank you so much, David. It's been a pleasure talking to you.